Welcome, fellow denizens of the Grimdark future. You found your way to Grimdark Shards, your refuge in a universe where hope is but a fleeting candle in endless night. Tonight, we delve into the industrial labyrinth of Hive City Rokarth, where whispers of an otherworldly power, a so-called fallen goddess, seep through the cracked foundations and echo in desperate hearts. Prepare yourself for shadows of heresy, the clash of faith and treachery, and the unwavering resolve of the Adepta Sororitas. The story you're about to hear weaves horror, mystery, valor, and sacrifice into a tapestry of war and devotion, worthy of the Imperium's darkest annals. If you crave more tales from the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, subscribe to Grimdark Shards, like this video, share it with your fellow battle brothers and sisters, and hit the bell so you never miss the next descent into the depths of Warhammer 40,000. Stay vigilant. There are secrets lurking in the Underhive that no one is prepared for. Now, steel your soul. The whispers have already begun. Whispers of the Fallen Goddess. A Warhammer 40,000 story. The acrid stench of burning promethium clung to the air above Hive City Rokarth. Towers of grey rockcrete and tarnished adamantium stretched thousands of meters into the sky, their summits disappearing in the haze of the planet's polluted atmosphere. Far below, in the lower confines, neon signs flickered fitfully in the gloom, and the constant drone of machinery reverberated through the steel walkways. It was said that Rokarth's every breath came from the labor of 1 billion souls chained to industry, a monstrous, teeming behemoth that fed the Imperium's endless wars. Only a few kilometers yet, an entire social universe above, an ornate cathedral dominated the Hive's upper levels, buttressed by arches and flying buttresses older than living memory. Dedicated to the Emperor of mankind, it stood both as a testament to his divine glory and as a gentle reminder that faith was the only bulwark against the horrors lurking within and without. But something had changed in Rokarth of late. A pall of dread seemed to hang over the city. Grim rumors circulated of a mysterious fallen goddess whose worship had begun to fester in the Underhive like an infected wound. Such talk, if true, could mean one thing: heresy. It was this rumor that had summoned the Adepta Sororitas of the Order of the Bloody Rose, a militant arm of the ecclesiarchy known for its zealous fury and uncompromising devotion. Their presence heralded more than mere policing. It was a clarion call of war against heresy, a fiery promise that the Emperor's wrath would soon be unleashed. Canoness Superior Emilia Voss stood at the prow of the Valkyrie gunship as it descended toward Rokarth's primary landing spire. The roar of engines all but drowned the chanting from the interior cabin, where her sisters of battle murmured litanies of protection. Tall, broad-shouldered, her graying hair cropped close around a stern visage that bore scars of countless battles, Voss remained motionless. Only the slight tremor of the Valkyrie's hull betrayed how fiercely the craft buffeted against the swirling winds. She silently repeated a prayer to the Emperor, focusing her mind. For weeks, she and her retinue had traveled from a nearby war zone at the request of Rokarth's Ministorum Bishop. Whispers of a subversive cult had grown so dire that the bishop had invoked an ancient ordinance, direct intervention by the Adepta Sororitas. Voss had answered, for it was her sworn duty to stamp out heresy in all its guises. They touched down, the Valkyrie's landing gears hissing as they met the reinforced platform. Engines powered down. The side doors opened, revealing a reception party of ecclesiarchy officials, local security enforcers, and a handful of robed administratum functionaries waiting on the platform. Sister Hospitaller Ellen was first out, her white robes moving softly in the wind, medical satchel at her hip. Then came Sister Sergeant Adeline, helm tucked under one arm, a bolter maglocked to her power armor's side. One by one, a dozen sororitas in crimson and black stepped onto the landing spire, each bearing the rose motif of their order. Canoness Voss at last emerged behind them, a figure of quiet authority. A stooped priest, Bishop Philandus, by the look of his richly embroidered vestments, approached, flanked by two local PDF officers in stiff, formal attire. The bishop's wizened face was drawn with anxiety, and sweat beaded his brow despite the high-altitude chill. "Canoness Superior," he said, voice cracking, "I thank the Emperor for your swift arrival. This hive, by his grace, needs your aid." Voss inclined her head just enough to show respect without subservience. "We have come as requested, Bishop. Tell me of these rumors." Bishop Philandus swallowed and made the sign of the Aquila. "Stories have spread among the Underhivers, talk of a fallen goddess who can free them from the Imperium's demands. It began as idle gossip, but the hive is uneasy. There have been incidents of violence, murders, possibly ritual in nature. Entire hab blocks speak in hushed voices of an impending revelation. Some claim this goddess is an aspect of the Emperor's grace. Others say she is a Xenos deity. All of it is heresy." Voss's voice was low and measured. "Have you found any sign of who is behind these rumors?" "There is a group." Philandus hesitated, glancing at his aides for courage. "We believe it is a chaos cult, Canoness. Their rhetoric is too organized to be mere underground gossip. We suspect Tzeentchian, the changer of ways." At that word, Tzeentchian, the sisters behind Voss, tensed. Chaotic infiltration in a hive city was a black stain waiting to be torn free. It was also notoriously cunning. Tzeentchian thrived on deceit. "How far has this infection spread?" asked Voss. Philandus pressed his lips together. "I fear it may have infested the ecclesiarchy itself. Some of my junior clerics have vanished, and the local magistratum enforcers have discovered bizarre artifacts in the Underhive. We are overwhelmed." Voss exhaled slowly. "We shall do what must be done. The Emperor protects." Her quiet, steely certainty seemed to bolster the bishop. He led them inside, past looming statues of saints, to a high corridor lit by swinging censers. There, the sisters received formal blessings from the city's clergy. By the time the ceremonial greetings concluded, night had fallen, casting the hive in flickering luminescence from millions of windows and lumen strips. Voss turned to Sister Sergeant Adeline. "Organize the squads. We begin our investigation in the morning. Let none rest until we've uncovered this cult." Their arrival was only the first step. Deeper in the labyrinth of Rokarth's mid-habs and lower industrial zones lay something cunning and terrible, waiting to be unearthed. In the cramped corridors of the mid-hab levels, Sister Adeline led her squad of battle sisters on foot patrol. Above them, rusted gantries creaked with the footsteps of laborers, finishing late shifts in the factories. The smell of sweat and machine oil blended into the stale air. Overhead, heavy chains rattled in a slow, rhythmic drone. Neon signs illuminated the gloom in intermittent bursts of sickly color. Each step the sisters took thudded with the weight of ceramite sabatons on steel plating. Civilians shrank aside, bowing or crossing themselves, terrified and awed by the presence of the Adepta Sororitas. Word had spread quickly that the Emperor's warrior nuns were here, armed and ready to root out any sign of blasphemy. Sister Adeline paused at a battered archway leading to a communal shrine. She nodded to Sister Ophira, who readied her flamer. The local magistratum had reported suspicious gatherings here in the late hours. The lights were dimmed, the flicker of candles the only sign of occupancy within. Adeline advanced. By the authority of the ecclesiarchy, she called out. Identify yourselves. Silence. She heard faint scuttling, as though those inside were scattering. With a gesture, she directed two sisters to circle around and block the rear exit. Then she stepped forward. Her crimson power armor scraped the metal doorframe as she entered. Three robed figures huddled near a defaced imperial icon. The statue of the emperor on the altar had been chipped, its eyes hollowed out. Strange runes were etched at the statue's base, curving in an alien script that made Adeline's temples throb just to glance at them. One figure, an older man, stared in panic at the armed sororitas. Please, we didn't do anything, he wheezed. We only gathered to pray. Adeline's expression was stony. To whom do you pray? The man's mouth opened and closed. The fallen goddess, he whispered. She promised deliverance from the endless tithes, from the suffering we endure. I see, Adeline said softly. Her gauntleted hand brushed the hilt of her chainsword. Tell me how this goddess reveals herself. Another figure, a terrified woman, stammered. We heard her voice in dreams. She wept for us, claimed the Imperium enslaves our souls. We only sought hope. Even as the woman spoke, Sister Ophera examined the etched runes with disapproval. She recognized the subtle swirl of Tzeentchian's iconography, hidden in the curling script. This is no rightful prayer, Ophera said, voice laced with disgust. This is heresy. Tears streaked the old man's face. We didn't know, he whispered. She told us she was Aisha, the goddess of mercy who would free us from plague and tyranny. We believed her. At the mention of Aisha, Adeline's eyes narrowed. She had heard that name in ancient Eldar myths. Aisha, an alien goddess said to be imprisoned by Nurgle. For a group of hive dwellers to reference such a deity, clearly the cult was feeding them these heretical stories. Where did you first learn of this? Demanded Adeline. Who spread these lies? The old man's voice cracked. A traveling preacher. He said that the Emperor hides the truth, that Isha is real and yearns to save us from darkness. We never saw his face. He wore a mask of shimmering fabric. He left behind pamphlets, writing. Adeline clenched her jaw. You have consorted with the changer of ways, old man. A goddess who speaks from dreams is no goddess at all, but a demon of chaos. He hung his head, voice quavering. Emperor, forgive me. Before he could speak further, the woman behind him let out a strangled gasp. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed. The final robed figure, who had remained silent, muttered a word that twisted the air, causing an unpleasant crackle of energy. Sister Ophera's instincts flared. A warp trick, a minor hex. Adeline roared, "Down!" She slammed into the hexer with her armored shoulder, sending him sprawling. Ophera squeezed her flamer's trigger, gouting a tongue of purifying flame. The noxious warp scent dissipated under the roar of the holy Prometheum. In seconds, the cultist was ablaze, shrieking until the screams turned to choking silence. When the last echoes died, Adeline surveyed the shrine. One cultist dead by flame, the other two moaning in terror and coughing from the fumes. "Secure them," she ordered. "They may have information." The battered statue of the Emperor stood defiled no longer. Sister Ophera hosed it with cleansing fire, blackening the metal with soot, but burning away the heretic runes. For now, one more vile cell was stamped out. But Sister Adeline knew this was only a speck of the corruption that lurked deeper. As the two whimpering survivors were dragged away, Adeline's thoughts returned to the name, Isha, a rumored Eldar goddess. Indeed, a fallen goddess from alien legends. The cult's cunning was evident, weaving Xeno's myth into a tapestry that appealed to the desperate. It was the method of Tzeentch: sow confusion, exploit doubt, She prayed that the Canoness would find the root of this plague soon, for the Hive City was perched on the razor's edge of panic. High above the Underhive's squalor, Canoness Voss conferred with Bishop Philandus and a cadre of Sororitas in a secure chamber attached to Rokarth's great cathedral. Candles flickered in the gloom, casting elongated shadows on the stone walls. The thick aroma of incense mingled with the tang of molten wax. On a wooden table lay the various heretical artifacts seized from suspect shrines. Among them, charred pamphlets bearing stylized silhouettes of a slender figure crowned with branches or horns. The text beneath read, "She weeps for you, the fallen goddess freed." The language was High Gothic, twisted with unknown glyphs. Over half the pamphlet was indecipherable. Voss stood with arms folded. Sister Adeline's squad captured 3 cultists. They speak of Isha, an Eldar goddess. We know from Xenos lore that Isha was taken by the plague god. There is no benevolent goddess offering deliverance. This is a deception. Bishop Philandus paled. Xenos worship is heresy of the highest order, and if, as you suspect, Tzeentch is behind this, he swallowed hard. Then we face a cunning foe. One of the Sororitas, Sister Theodara, cleared her throat. Canoness, we found references in an older ecclesiarchy bestiary about Tzeentchian cults adopting the guise of other deities. They twist half-remembered legends to seduce the unwary. The pamphlets match known patterns of Tzeentch infiltration, illusions, promises of transformation, liberation from plague or tyranny. Voss's gaze traveled across the table. Among the seized artifacts lay a shard of shimmering crystal, faintly pulsing with warp energy. She could sense it, like a lurking presence that made her skin crawl. Carefully, she picked it up with a sanctified metal tongue. Thin streamers of light refracted within. "Sorcery," she murmured, setting it down again. No wonder the Underhivers are enthralled. Bishop Philandus pressed the sign of the Aguila to his chest. "I beg you, Canoness, deliver us from this corruption. The Hive's mood is fragile. Workers already talk of refusing their factory shifts, chanting that the fallen goddess will break their chains. If this escalates, entire Hab blocks might rebel. I fear open insurrection." Voss nodded, face stern. "We will purge this cult swiftly. Tzeentch's illusions thrive on fear and misinformation. The Sisterhood will bring the Emperor's light into these shadows. Bishop, I suggest you bolster the faithful with sermons of defiance. Remind them that the Emperor's wrath is swift. Let them know the Sororitas stand ready." As the bishop hurried to arrange citywide broadcasts, Voss turned to Sister Adeline. "Interrogate the prisoners thoroughly. If they do not repent, they face the Emperor's judgment. From them, glean what you can about their leaders. We must find this traveling preacher." Adeline bowed. "By your will, Canoness." With that, the sisters dispersed, the war for Rokarth's soul taking shape. The labyrinthine depths of Rokarth's Underhive sprawled like a diseased organ, a place where the flickers of overhead lamps revealed only pockets of gloom. The smell of rot was thick in the stale air, and echoes carried strangely through rusted corridors. Over the centuries, entire sublevels had collapsed, sealing away old tech vaults and forming hidden enclaves. It was the perfect breeding ground for a heresy that thrived in secrecy. Canoness Voss herself led a strike force deeper that day, 10 sisters in full battle plate, accompanied by a handful of local enforcer guides. They wove through half-flooded maintenance tunnels, stepping around broken piping and heaps of corroded machinery. Graffiti smeared the walls, swirling eyes and ring-like patterns that stung the gaze. Each step downwards increased the sense of dread. Sister Sergeant Adeline walked close to Voss, weapon raised. The enforcers, though armed with shotguns and decked in flak armor, clutched their guns nervously. They had never before ventured so far below the sanctioned levels. Somewhere in the distance, a maddened voice cried out, followed by a wet gurgle. Then silence. Sister Lucia, a Celestian with keen senses, crouched and signaled for a halt. "Sounds of movement up ahead," she whispered. "Could be cultists." Voss nodded. "In the Emperor's name, we advance." They switched to minimal luminator beams, forming a tight wedge. Rounding a corner, they came upon what might once have been a large pumping station for waste disposal. Now it resembled a sacrificial altar. Half-collapsed pillars ringed an open space strewn with rotting carcasses of Underhive vermin. At the center, a cluster of hooded shapes gathered around a battered dais. Flickering candles revealed twisted outlines on the floor, complex runes that glowed faintly. As the sisters approached, they saw that the hooded cultists were enthralled in some sort of ceremony. A deep chanting rose and fell, guttural syllables that had no place in human throats. In the dais's center, a mound of luminous crystals pulsed with sickly color, each reflecting kaleidoscopic shapes into the gloom. Voss signaled her warriors forward. They fanned out, silent as wraiths in their power armor. But in the hush, a single bolt of warp light flared. A robed figure at the dais spun around, face hidden behind an ornate mask. He hissed a warning. The chanting ceased abruptly, replaced by panicked cries as the cultists scrambled for weapons. "Cleanse them," Voss commanded. Bolters roared, muzzle flashes painting the darkness in staccato bursts of light. Cultists shrieked as their robes were torn apart by explosive rounds. A few returned fire with las pistols, while others hurled warp fire that splashed against the sister's armor in crackling arcs. A warp lance grazed Sister Lucia, scorching her pauldron and releasing a foul reek of ozone. She bit back a cry, returning a precise bolter shot that took her attacker's head. Amid the chaos, the masked figure at the dais raised both hands, chanting a string of alien incantations. The crystals at his feet shimmered, and from them erupted a swirl of multi-hued smoke. It formed into slithering, half-real shapes, small demonic manifestations with spindly limbs and cackling maws. They surged at the sisters. Voss advanced without pause, her plasma pistol spitting azure fire. Each demonic shape screeched as it was struck, dissolving into stardust. Sister Sergeant Adeline hurled a frag grenade into the dais, scattering the crystals and toppling the masked sorcerer from his perch. The swirl of illusions abruptly dissipated. The sorcerer tried to stagger upright, but Voss reached him in a flash, pressing the muzzle of her pistol beneath his mask. "I offer you a single chance at redemption," she said, in a voice as cold as void winds. "Surrender and confess." A strangled laugh came from behind the mask. "Fools, you serve a corpse god while the true power rises. The fallen goddess will be reborn. She will lead us to..." Voss fired. The bolt of plasma vaporized his skull mid-sentence, leaving a warped mask clattering to the floor. Around the dais, the last pockets of cultists were gunned down. The entire skirmish ended in under a minute, the smell of ozone and burnt flesh lingering in the still air. Surveying the fallen, Sister Lucia's gaze landed upon a small tome that had tumbled free of the sorcerer's robes, its cover bearing the swirling symbol of Tzeentch. She gently picked it up, wincing from her scorched pauldron. Flipping through the pages, she muttered, "Heretical scribbles, along with references to Aisha. There are diagrams. They appear to fuse Eldar runes with Tzeentch's iconography." Voss looked over the battered dais. The crystals lay shattered from the grenade's blast. They sought to conjure some demon, or at least open a conduit, she guessed. Tzeentch's approach: infiltration, illusions, a promise of liberation. and now they cloak it under the guise of some half-remembered Xenos goddess. Adeline eyed the tome with revulsion. What is their ultimate aim? The Canoness's expression was grim. The rumors speak of a fallen goddess returning. Tzeentch might be planning to manifest a demon that pretends to be this Isha. The confusion would be catastrophic, especially if the city's lower levels rally to it. She stepped away, raising her voice so all the sisters and the remaining enforcers could hear. We'll push deeper, destroy all sites of warp taint. The bishop must be informed of the scale of this threat. No corner of Rokarth is safe until we have scoured it of these filths. No one present doubted that far worse horrors awaited in the city's shadowy depths. Days passed in a blur of fighting, investigations, and fervent prayer. The Order of the Bloody Rose fanned out across Rokarth. They raided suspect habs, burned hidden shrines, and interrogated countless citizens. Yet with every cult cell destroyed, new rumors arose, fueling fear among the populace. Citizens whispered that the sisters were lying, that the fallen goddess was real and had appeared in fleeting visions. An ethereal woman with tears of starlight who promised deliverance from the Imperium's grinding tyranny. Factory workers, who toiled 16-hour shifts in suffocating conditions, found hope in the heretical rumor. Gangers in the Underhive claimed they had seen her illusions dancing along the metal walls like living fractals. The tension mounted. Meanwhile, strange phenomena plagued Rokarth. Machinery in the mid-habs malfunctioned at random, jamming or spewing toxic fumes. The spire lifts between levels shuddered as if possessed, abruptly dropping passengers hundreds of meters before halting mere inches from disaster. Whispers told of flickering shapes in the reflection of broken windows, slender ghosts wreathed in shifting color. In the cathedral's strategic chamber, Canoness Voss knelt before a gilded statue of the Emperor, deep in supplication. Sister Hospitaller Ellen stood nearby, discreetly tending to Voss's bandaged arm. A wayward shard of demonic crystal had cut the Canoness during the most recent skirmish, leaving an ugly bruise that refused to fade. I am fine, sister, Voss insisted quietly. Tend the wounded who need you more than I. Ellen only bowed. Your humility does you credit, Canoness, but none shall fight on with infection. Our bodies are temples of his will. Voss conceded with a curt nod. As Ellen worked, the chamber doors swung open and Sister Adeline entered, her expression somber. Canoness, Adeline said, the prisoner you wish to speak with. That older man from the Midhab shrine. He is ready. Voss rose, ignoring the protest in her arm. Take me to him. They crossed the vaulted corridors to a small chapel that had been repurposed as an interrogation cell. 2 Sororitas guards stood outside. Within, the old man knelt on the cold stone floor, wrists bound. His eyes, ringed with fatigue, flicked up at the Canoness. He bowed, trembling. My name is Thalamar, he said in a frail voice. I have thought on my sins, Canoness. Voss regarded him solemnly. Then speak if you wish redemption. Tears trickled down his cheeks. We never intended to worship a demon. We were told she was the goddess Isha, come to save us from disease and heartbreak. My grandson died in the factory. The medic lines are so long, the cure so scarce. I believed the Imperium had failed me. His confession hung in the air, the unspoken tragedy of billions of hive workers who toiled under crushing demands. Voss did not waver. The Emperor challenges us all. Our faith is tested by hardship. You sought a false goddess for solace. Now your only hope is to renounce heresy and reveal to me all that you know. Thalamar nodded feebly. I have had dreams, vivid nightmares, of a masked preacher. He calls himself the voice of the weeping lady. He says she stands at the edge of reality, waiting for a mortal vessel. The cult calls it a sacred union. If enough blood is spilled, the goddess will be granted flesh. Adeline's jaw tightened. A summoning ritual, she muttered. The old man continued. They plan to use a grand ceremony soon in the cathedral. They want to defile your sacred site, to harness the city's greatest concentration of faith and channel it into their abomination. He swallowed. I overheard rumors that high-ranking officials in the ecclesiarchy might be involved, those who have lost faith or crave power. They believe the goddess will grant them dominion over the hive. Voss's eyes burned with righteous indignation. They seek to insult the Emperor's house with their vile sorcery. This cannot stand. Thalamar looked away. I have told you all, Canoness. I only beg for the Emperor's mercy. Silence reigned in the chapel. Then Voss spoke quietly. Sister Ellen, see that he receives guidance in the ecclesiarchy's rites of penance. If he is truthful, let him live and atone. Thalamar was led away. Outside, Adeline turned to Voss. Could the cult truly infiltrate the cathedral? Voss's expression was resolute. Yes. Tzeentch thrives in cunning infiltration. The bishop spoke of vanishings among his staff. We cannot trust even the upper spires. We must search the cathedral. If the cult's final gambit is to stage a ritual there, we will face them on hallowed ground, and they will find no triumph. Darkness fell outside the towering cathedral spire. The city's many lights glittered below like phosphorescent algae on a dark sea, giving the impression that the cathedral floated above an endless gloom. Within its sanctified halls, the Sisters of the Bloody Rose began a systematic sweep. Torches lit the ancient corridors, illuminating gilded frescoes of saints and relics of martyred heroes. Canoness Voss assembled a strike team of her most trusted veterans: Sister Sergeant Adeline, Sister Lucia, Sister Theodora, and a half-dozen others. Bishop Philandus accompanied them, pale and anxious, wringing his hands at each new discovery of suspicious iconography. A respectful hush hung over them as they entered a section of the cathedral seldom visited, an annex that stored relics from Rokarth's founding centuries ago. Dust motes swirled in the torchlight. The walls were lined with sealed reliquaries, each bearing the sigil of a saint or local confessor. The hush was broken only by the soft tread of ceramite boots. Suddenly, Sister Lucia held up a hand. "Quiet," she hissed. A faint murmur drifted from somewhere ahead. The group pressed forward, ears straining. They rounded a corner into an antechamber that contained an enormous tapestry of the Emperor's victory over heretics. But it had been defiled. Strange symbols, circles within circles, eyes within eyes, had been painted across it in shimmering dyes. Figures in ecclesiarchy robes stood chanting in low voices, each facing the tapestry with arms raised. The lead figure turned. It was an older woman, the cathedral's chief archivist by the looks of her vestments, but her face was contorted with a mix of ecstasy and sorrow, and warp light flickered across her eyes. "We have waited for you," the archivist intoned. "Our goddess welcomes all, even the Emperor's hounds." Voss stepped forward, flanked by her sisters. "Lay down your heretical illusions. This cathedral is the Emperor's domain." The archivist's lips twisted into a mirthless grin. "Soon, all domains shall belong to the Changer of Ways. We serve the Weeping Lady, whose tears shall reshape this hive. Even the Grand Bishop will kneel when she appears in glory." A swirl of warp energy crackled in the archivist's hands. Sister Theodora fired her bolter in response, but a shimmering shield of raw sorcery deflected the rounds, sending them ricocheting off the stone walls. The other robed cultists spun around, chanting frenetically. In a flash, Canoness Voss raised her blessed blade. "For the Emperor!" she cried. The sisters advanced, weapons blazing. Bolter shells tore apart cultists before they could fully react. The archivist shrieked, flinging arcs of warp light that sliced through the air like knives. One enforcer, standing behind the sisters, cried out as the sorcery seared his unprotected flesh. Voss lunged forward, her power sword humming with lethal energy. She smashed through the archivist's warp shield with a single blow, heedless of the swirling illusions that sparked and crackled against her armor. With her second strike, she cut the heretic down at the knees. The archivist collapsed with a scream of mingled pain and rage. In moments, the antechamber fell silent. The last echoes of the cult's chanting died on the stone. Sister Lucia kicked aside a tattered robe to reveal a cache of bizarre artifacts. More crystals, an Eldar-styled pendant carved with the symbol of Aisha, smeared with fresh blood. Sister Theodara examined them grimly, her gauntlet trembling with revulsion. Bishop Philandus, trembling at the carnage, stepped forward. Apostasy, within these sacred halls. He made the sign of the Aquila over his chest. Truly, Tzeentchian's corruption runs deep. Blessed Emperor, forgive us. Voss's gaze locked on the archivist's sprawled form. The woman coughed up blood, eyes wild, but a twisted grin still curved her lips. We are but one coil in the serpent, she rasped. At the apex of the spire, the true rite will be performed. Sister Adeline pressed a bolter muzzle to the heretic's head, but Voss lifted a hand. Wait, where is your master? This masked preacher who spreads the word of the fallen goddess. Tell us. Blood bubbled at the archivist's mouth. He moves like living smoke, she whispered. He awaits the moment when faith and despair converge, when the tears of the weeping lady are shed in the highest chapel. There shall she be born anew. Voss's voice turned glacial. Who among the ecclesiarchy aids him? A cackle escaped the archivist's lips. One who yearned for true power, someone you trusted. When you see him next, it will be too late. Voss's patience ended. She gave a curt nod to Adeline, who pulled the trigger. The archivist's body fell limp. The canoness rose, breathing heavily, her mind racing. We must secure the high chapel, she said to the bishop. Summon your loyal clergy. If the cult means to stage a grand ritual, that is the likely site. Bishop Philandus nodded. I will do everything to aid you, Canoness. As the bishop hurried away, Sister Lucia stooped over the cult artifacts. If a major ritual commences, she murmured, they could very well attempt to conjure a demon that masquerades as this Isha. The illusions might be powerful enough to sway half the hive. Voss looked up at the towering arches overhead, her eyes narrowing. We must ensure they do not succeed. Gather every sister. We fortify the cathedral. Let the cult come if they will. Here we shall break them once and for all. Despite Voss's efforts, the final blow fell sooner than anyone anticipated. At the stroke of midnight, with the cathedral spire cloaked in darkness, a wave of psychic force rippled across Rokarth. Wards flickered. The luminous glass windows shattered in a deafening crash. From high in the gloom, a voice echoed across the city's vox channels, an androgynous tone dripping with otherworldly resonance. Heed me, children of Vol. The Emperor has chained your souls in misery. But I, your rightful goddess, have returned to set you free. Cast aside your fear. Let my tears wash away your sorrow. Bow to the fallen goddess. In the spire's highest chapel, Canoness Voss slammed her helm on, sealing the environment with a hiss. Sister Adeline, Sister Lucia, and the entire retinue formed ranks beside her. The chapel's walls were carved with images of the Emperor's triumphs, glinting in the uncertain light of the candelabras. Clerics and novices cowered in corners, shaken by the psychic broadcast. Outside the chapel doors, Footsteps approached. The gilded portal was flung wide, revealing a tall figure in ecclesiarchy robes, a high-ranking confessor known to Voss, Confessor Vorasi, a man she had met only briefly upon arrival. Now, a shimmering mask of warp threads clung to his face, his eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. Voss raised her pistol. "Confessor, stand down." Vorasi's lips curled into a cruel smile. With a swift motion, he peeled away the warp mask, revealing a visage that flickered with unnatural angles, a shape half changed by Tzeentchian's gifts. "Canoness Voss," he said in a mocking tone, "such valor, but it shall not save you. The true rite begins now." Behind him, robed cultists bearing staves and arcane tomes poured into the chapel. Ecclesiarchy novices, enthralled by sorcery, stumbled in their wake like puppets. On a wide dais at the chapel's center stood the cathedral's ancient altar, newly defiled with Tzeentchian runes. The air hummed with tension. Sister Theodara let out a cry. "We will burn your corruption, traitor." But Vorasi only laughed. He extended a hand, releasing a bolt of shimmering warp energy that slammed into the front rank of Sororitas. Sister Lucia staggered back, battered but unbroken, her armor charred. Bolters roared in return, cutting down a wave of cultists. They collapsed, shrieking, but more flooded in. Voss's voice echoed in the high dome. "Purge these heretics. Let no ritual be completed." She led the charge, brandishing her power sword. Sisters fanned out, unleashing controlled bolter volleys. The chapel exploded into chaos. Muzzle flashes, warp light, and screams mingled beneath the vaulted roof. Shattered shards of stained glass crunched underfoot. Vorasi strode through the melee like a specter. The warp twisted about him, forming illusions of monstrous shapes that attacked and vanished in the blink of an eye. Sister Adeline swung her chainsword, severing the head of one illusory demon, only for it to dissolve into luminous dust. She cursed, searching for the real threat among the shifting illusions. Through the confusion, a dais near the altar began to glow. A slender figure flickered into being, at first ephemeral. Its face was veiled, trailing spectral tears that dripped onto the floor with a hiss. The tears sizzled, forming swirling puddles of warp light. The monstrous presence radiated false benevolence, like a maternal mockery. A hush fell over the chapel, as cultists and enthralled novices knelt, arms raised. Even some sororitas momentarily faltered, reeling from the disorienting warp aura. The entity spoke, its voice the same that had boomed across the Vox channels. "Children of Rokarth, your suffering is at an end. I am your deliverer, Isha, freed at last." Canoness Voss clutched her sword tighter, feeling the psychic pressure. She recognized the shape of a demon, wearing Isha's form as a grotesque costume. "This is not salvation," she roared. "It is chaos itself." She charged, raising her blade to strike down the half-formed entity, but Vorasi interposed himself, parrying her blow with a crackling staff. He channeled warp energy through it, hissing, "Your emperor is alive, Voss. Look upon the truth your faith has blinded you to." Voss snarled, pushing the staff aside with raw strength. "Number, the emperor's light is truth, and your illusions are dust." Their duel began in earnest, the canoness's sword crackling against the staff's warp-charged nodes. Bolts of raw energy singed her armor's edges. She felt waves of unnatural cold coursing through the metal, threatening to freeze her movements. Yet she pressed on, each strike accompanied by a fervent prayer. The Emperor's name fell from her lips like hammer blows, forging a shield of faith that defied the twisting warp. Elsewhere in the chapel, her sisters fought valiantly. Sister Adeline led a squad to cut down cultists who were chanting around the dais, each chanting voice fueling the daemon's manifestation. Sister Lucia, wounded, fired her bolter from behind a toppled pew, dispatching any robed figure that strayed into her sights. Incandescent promethium from the sisters' flamers bathed the floor, turning shrines of heresy to so much ash. Yet the daemon's presence continued to coalesce. A luminous swirl of shifting color enveloped it, and from its veiled face came an unholy wail, a sound of sorrow so profound it threatened to break mortal hearts. One sister clutched her helmet, collapsing with tears streaming down her face, undone by warp-laden grief. Canoness Voss felt the psychic cry lancing her mind. She clenched her teeth, refusing to yield. Her faith was ironclad. She roared, driving her blade forward in a thrust that shattered Varazi's staff. His eyes widened in shock. With a final savage swing, Voss cleaved him from collarbone to hip. The traitor fell back, blood spraying across the cracked marble floor. Even as he died, he laughed, chortling, "It is too late. She is here. It's just risen." Voss turned, panting, to see the demon's form solidify further. Though still partially translucent, it radiated immense warp power, as if drawing strength from each drop of blood spilled in the chapel. It towered taller than any mortal, slender arms outstretched in mock benediction. The tattered veil parted, revealing a face that might have been beautiful, were it not for eyes blazing with infernal cunning. Over and over it whispered, "Rejoice, I am come to guide you, beloved children." An unholy quiet fell. Everyone, whether cultist or sister, seemed transfixed by the swirling aura for a heartbeat. The illusions in the air showed fields of green, fresh water, an escape from the industrial gloom of Rokarth, a glimpse of false paradise. But behind it lurked shadowy suggestions of writhing tentacles and flayed corpses. Tzeentchian's hallmark, illusions blending beauty and horror. Canoness. Voss stepped forward, reasserting her will. "Daughters of the Emperor," she called, "do not heed the demon's lies. Let the Emperor's truth be your shield." Her voice cut through the gloom, rallying her sisters. Sister Adeline led a cry of faith and fire and opened fire on the entity. Bolter shells impacted the daemon's shimmering form, some exploding harmlessly, others cracking the swirl of warp energy. A shriek ripped from the creature's lips. Seizing the moment, Sister Lucia charged with an eviscerator chain blade, revving it with a scream of metal teeth. She swung at the demon's torso. Warp flesh parted in a spray of luminous ichor. The creature reeled. Yet in the same motion, it backhanded Lucia, hurling her into a pillar with bone-crunching force. The Celestian crumpled, unmoving. Sister Adeline shouted in fury, igniting her jump pack to leap overhead and descend with her chainsword. Another wave of tears from the demon sizzled across the floor, forming a slick of warp fire. Adeline skidded and nearly lost her footing before Voss intervened, hauling her upright. "Stay close," Voss commanded. "We strike together." Around them, the swirling illusions intensified. The entire chapel seemed to flicker through dreamlike vistas, as though torn from reality. One instant, it was the grand Gothic chamber. The next, it was a rotting orchard under an alien sun, then a shifting fractal corridor. The sisters pressed their attack, ignoring the illusions, trusting the Emperor to guide their aim. Gradually, they corralled the daemon, herding it away from the dais. The creature shrieked, raking at them with ephemeral claws. Sister Theodara fell, her torso cleaved open by a warp lance. Another sister lost an arm to a burst of crackling warp fire. Yet the survivors advanced with unwavering zeal. They recited the litany of purity, each word a prayer knife stabbing at the demon's power. At last, the entity flickered, forced to coil in on itself like a wounded serpent. The illusions faltered. The creature's voice, once haunting, now hissed with wrath. Canoness Voss raised her bolt pistol, pressing forward through the ruin of the chapel. "You will not profane the Emperor's domain. Return to the warp from whence you came." The daemon spat out a final mocking laugh. "Ignorant child, I was once revered by a mighty race. I am the mother of mercy, twisted though I am. Even death cannot silence me forever." Voss's pistol barked. The holy shells shredded the demon's ephemeral flesh. Sister Adeline unleashed a point-blank flamer burst, wreathed in a final resplendent glory of cleansing fire. The creature's veil ignited in a swirl of color, warp fire turning inward on itself. With a shriek that echoed across all corners of the hive, the demon collapsed, imploding into a vortex of raw warp energy. A backwash of psychic force slammed everyone in the chapel to the floor. And then, nothing. The illusions vanished, leaving only the battered reality of a broken cathedral strewn with bodies. A hush so profound it felt like the silence after a thunderclap. Canoness. Voss groaned, pushing herself up. Her entire body ached. Sisters around her stirred, some wounded, others rising shakily to their feet. The dais at the chapel's center was blackened. The stone melted from the concentrated warp energies. Where the demon had stood was now a swirl of ash, drifting in an unseen breeze. She surveyed the devastation. The glorious frescoes on the vaults were scorched, many columns shattered. Burning debris littered the once sacred floor. Gently, she removed her battered helm. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. Still, she breathed thanks that the abomination had been banished. Bishop Philandus, who had hidden with a coterie of faithful novices, now crept forward. "Kick Canoness," he stammered, gazing at the carnage. "Is it over?" Voss turned her gaze to him. The bishop's eyes were wet with tears of horror, but behind them glimmered a spark of hope. "Yes," she said quietly. "The demon is banished. Tzeentchian's plan has failed." She looked around, grief weighing on her heart at the sight of fallen sisters. Sister Lucia lay motionless, her body broken. Sister Theodara's bloody remains were nearby. Others knelt next to each other, offering what meager aid they could. Sister Hospitaller Ellen, who had arrived in time for the end, tended to the wounded, her face grim and determined. In the rubble near the altar, Sister Adeline peeled aside a section of collapsed masonry, revealing an unconscious novice pinned beneath. Adeline eased the debris free. Her battered armor showed deep scorch marks. She coughed, meeting Voss's gaze. "We have many casualties," she said, voice cracking, "but we prevailed. This day is ours." Bishop Philandus slowly sank to his knees. Praise the Emperor. The city was at the brink of damnation. He covered his face. May he forgive our failings. Voss's lips pressed into a thin line. We are the faithful of the God Emperor. When chaos threatened, we stood firm, as we must, until the end of our days. Then she wavered, eyes fluttering. Sister Ellen hurried over. "Canoness, your wound. There is warp taint in it." She touched a vial of sanctified unguent to Voss's arm, eliciting a sharp intake of breath. Already dark veins were visible along the cut, as though the warp's poison lingered. Voss locked eyes with Adeline. "Help me onto my feet." She rose, wincing. "Sisters, gather what is left of our wounded. This cathedral stands as a testament to the Emperor's might, even in ruin. We shall not falter." As the dawn light began to creep through the shattered windows, the scale of destruction became clear. The cult, decapitated by Verasi's death, had collapsed. Survivors would likely scatter into the darkest corners of the Underhive, but they no longer had their unholy champion. The conspirators in the ecclesiarchy had been revealed. Their master plan, to birth a Tzeentchian demon wearing the mask of the Eldar goddess, was thwarted. The Sisters of the Bloody Rose had paid dearly for victory, but their victory was final. In the following days, squads of Sororitas and loyal Arbites scoured Rokarth, hunting down cult remnants. Many citizens, awakened from illusions, returned to labor, though haunted by nightmares of the fallen goddess. Ecclesiarchy sermons thundered from every vox speaker, proclaiming that faith in the Emperor had saved the Hive from doom. The people, scarred yet grateful, offered prayers of thanks to the sisters who had bled to protect them. At the cathedral's main plaza, a solemn memorial service was held for the fallen. Canoness Superior Emilia Voss, arm tightly bandaged, presided. Despite her injuries, she stood unbowed. Row upon row of caskets lay draped in the red and black of the bloody rose, each containing a sister who had sacrificed her life in the final battle. Incense smoke curled overhead, and across the entire Hive City, the bells tolled in mourning. Bishop Philandus, humbled by these events, stood beside Voss, assisting in the final rites. His voice trembled as he read from the book of St. Lucius. Though we walk through the valley of darkness, the Emperor's light shall guide us, and we shall fear no evil. Voss's own voice carried across the crowd, amplified by vox grills. These sisters, our beloved kin, gave their all so that Rokarth might stand. We shall never forget them. Their names shall be etched in the annals of our order, and their memory shall burn bright, an eternal flame against the night of heresy. Sister Adeline stepped forward with a torch, igniting a massive brazier at the plaza's center. A hush fell upon the assembly. The flames danced, casting flickering shadows across the grieving faces. From the city's spires to its deepest hab blocks, the tale of the Sororitas stand against the fallen goddess spread. Workers whispered it on assembly lines. Nobles repeated it in hushed admiration at lavish gatherings. Weeks later, Canoness Voss made ready to depart Rokarth. Though she would carry the scars of warp taint for the rest of her life, the Ecclesiarchy's Medicae had contained the corruption. Bishop Philandus assured her that vigilance remained strong, with new ecclesiarchal patrols policing the lower levels. The seeds of Tzeentchian's heresy had been burned away, their vile illusions dispelled. In the battered hangar bay high on the spire, Valkyrie gunships waited. Sister Adeline and the remaining sisters, less than half the number that had arrived, stood behind Voss, their heads bowed in solemn reflection. Thunder rumbled outside, promising toxic rainfall from the planet's polluted sky. Before boarding, Voss turned one last time to gaze upon the city's colossal silhouette. Towers jutted defiantly from the gloom. She thought of the countless lives saved, and of the many sisters lost. She felt the weight of their sacrifice pressing on her heart. Yet with that weight came pride. The Order of the Bloody Rose had done its duty. Her final words before ascending the ramp echoed in Sister Adeline's mind. Where faith stands firm, the darkness finds no hold. Remember that, and remember them. The gunship's engines thundered to life, carrying the Adepta Sororitas away from Hive City Rokarth. Below, billions resumed the grim cycle of existence, forging weapons and machinery for an Imperium forever at war. But they did so with renewed zeal, for they had borne witness to the Emperor's mortal angels who descended to cast out chaos itself. In the centuries to come, songs and litanies would preserve the memory of the day the fallen goddess threatened Rokarth. They would speak of illusions and horrors, of weeping that could melt minds, and of the unwavering women who answered with bolter, flamer, and unbreakable faith. And in that memory lay a kernel of the Imperium's greatest strength, that though darkness forever gnawed at the edges, the light of the Emperor, carried in the hearts of his devotees, would never be extinguished. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But as long as faith endures, hope yet lives beneath the Emperor's watchful gaze. Thus ends our harrowing plunge into the veiled corridors and burning cathedrals of Hive City Rokarth, where heroism and heresy clashed in a symphony of bolter fire and haunting prophecy. But in this universe of ceaseless conflict, the next enemy, seen or unseen, is never far. Thank you for joining us here on Grimdark Shards. If you felt the churn of the warp in your veins, or the fire of faith burning in your heart, remember to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. Then ring the bell so you won't miss the next time we unlock forbidden lore, or recount epic feats from the Imperium's endless wars. Until our paths cross again in the shadows of the Underhive, or on the front lines of a distant crusade, keep your faith strong. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no respite, only war. The Emperor protects.